Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine this. You're completely awake, sitting comfortably, and suddenly, two handsome gentlemen in these incredible cloaks just appear.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's as if your granddaughters brought them along, except they see absolutely nothing.
Right.
Or picture a full-on, vividly detailed battle scene unfolding right there on the sleeve of your dressing gown.
Okay, that's pretty wild.
These aren't some weird dreams. These are just a couple of the mind-bending stories that pulled us headfirst into the fascinating world of hallucinations.
And what's really striking, right from the start is realizing that hallucinations aren't just some side effect of, like, mental illness.
Right.
Our source for this deep dive, Oliver Sacks's Hallucinations, makes it so clear that these experiences come in, well, a dizzying variety. They spring from all sorts of causes. And they're understood in wildly different ways across different cultures.
Exactly. So for this deep dive,
Mhm.
our mission is to give you, the learner, a real shortcut to grasping the complexities of hallucinations.
Yeah, sort of cut through the noise.
We're going way beyond just a simple dictionary definition to explore the rich, often really surprising details that Sacks uncovers.
And we'll try to keep it clear, without too much technical jargon.
Definitely. So where do we start? What is a hallucination at its core?
Well, at its most basic, it's perceiving something, seeing, hearing, smelling, whatever, without any actual external thing causing that perception.
Okay.
Yet, and this is key, to the person experiencing it, it feels utterly real.
That's the mind-bending part.
It really is. And it immediately throws a spotlight on how we usually perceive things we generally agree on what's out there, right?
Like seeing a bird fly by. We probably will see it.
Exactly. But the moment your perception lacks that shared reality, that consensual validation, as Sacks calls it, well, that's when the strangeness hits.
Realizing that the shadowy figure in the corner, or the faint whispering is actually just in your head.
Yeah, that's a shock.
It's not always a clear-cut thing, is it? Sacks talks about how hallucinations can kind of overlap with misperceptions and illusions.
That's a really good point. For instance, if you glance at someone's face and only register half of it, that's more of a misperception. You're seeing something real, just incompletely.
Okay. But what if you see, like, several identical copies of that person standing there?
Yeah.
That's different, right? Like polyopia.
It is different. Or seeing an after image, like a flash of light that lingers way too long, palinopsia. Are these just quirks, or are they edging into hallucination territory?
It gets fuzzy.
It does. Sacks suggests we tend to call something a misperception or illusion when there is a real external trigger, the actual face, the real flash of light.
Right.
Hallucinations, on the other hand, often seem to be, as he puts it so well, conjured out of thin air.
But the experience itself might feel like a mix.
For many people, yes, it can be hard to draw that line definitively.
It's interesting that Sacks doesn't really dive deep into dreams,
Yeah.
even though they feel super real while they're happening.
He doesn't, though he does mention that sort of dreamlike qualities some hallucinations have, and those dreamy states linked to certain seizures.
So there's maybe a spectrum. From waking through those half-asleep states.
Yeah, hypnagogic, hypnopompic, maybe all the way to full hallucinations. It suggests there could be some shared brain activity going on.
But Sacks is pretty clear.
He is. He sees hallucination in its full form as a unique and special category of consciousness. It's different from imagining, different from dreaming, different even from normal perception, though it borrows brain mechanisms from all of them.
Okay, now think about how we react to these things. In the West, there's often a real stigma, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. It's almost instantly linked to madness or, something seriously wrong with the brain.
Which is so different from other cultures.
Totally different. Sacks points out that in many societies, hallucinations, much like dreams, are seen as, well, special, even privileged states.
Not illness, but something to be sought out.
Sometimes, yeah, through spiritual practice, meditation, maybe certain substances, or even just solitude. It's a fundamental difference in perspective.
Which explains why people here are often so reluctant to talk about it.
Exactly. Fear of judgment, fear of being told they're losing their minds. Sacks was really grateful people shared their stories, hoping it would help reduce that misunderstanding.
Okay, let's get into some examples. The visual ones are often really striking.
They really are. Take Charles Lullen, this elderly scientist. After losing his sight, he started seeing these handsome gentlemen in amazing cloaks and hats.
and his granddaughters who were right there with him.
Saw nothing at all, which just perfectly illustrates how personal and internal these things are.
And he saw women too, right? Fancy dresses, elaborate hats.
Yeah, almost whimsical descriptions. And this ties directly into Charles Bonnet Syndrome, or CBS, which we'll definitely come back to.
Okay. And then there's Rosalie. Her CBS brought back scary figures.
It did, with a vengeance, as Sachs puts it, after a period without them. She described menacing men and women in green hats and furs. And for her, in that moment, they felt completely real. She'd even forgotten she had CBS.
And didn't stress trigger it for her, like a long trip in a fall.
Yes, that seems to have been the trigger. It really shows how our physical and emotional state can influence these things.
So with CBS, people usually know they're hallucinating because it's so weird.
Usually, yes, because the visions often don't fit the surroundings at all, like Lullen's unexpected visitors.
That sometimes they can seem more plausible.
They can, like when Lullen saw the gentleman while his granddaughters were there. In those cases, someone might initially think it's real.
We also heard about David Stewart seeing a burly ship captain he'd never met.
Right, clear image, bulbous nose, blue cap, someone he felt he might like even. Which again highlights that these faces are almost never people the person actually knows.
Which is so strange in itself.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Zelda's experiences add another layer, seeing her great-granddaughter float to the ceiling.
Whoa.
And these still kind of terrifying witch-like figures. But what's fascinating is she didn't realize how often it was happening until she kept a journal.
Suggests it might be more common than we think, just forgotten or dismissed.
Quite possibly. And Zelda also had these odd visual things that weren't full hallucinations, more like distortions.
Like her beard spreading across her face in the mirror, or her hair rising up.
Exactly. Those kinds of perceptual disturbances are also pretty common in CBS.
So what's actually going on in the brain when people see these things?
Well, brain imaging studies, like fMRI, have shown this really striking correspondence between the content of the hallucination, faces, colors, objects, textures, and the specific parts of the visual cortex that get activated, specifically the ventral visual pathway.
That's the what pathway, right, for recognizing things.
That's the one. So seeing faces lights up face areas, lights up color areas. It's like the system is being triggered internally.
And almost like the brain is playing reruns, but making them up.
Sort of. Sachs mentions the fusiform gyrus for recognizing faces gets active with cartoonish faces, while the superior temporal sulcus activates with more grotesque features. Even text hallucinations seem to involve abnormal activity in the visual word form area, the part that usually recognizes written words. It's strong evidence for a neurological basis.
Okay, you mentioned Charles Bonnet Syndrome, CBS, a couple of times. Let's dig into that.
Right. So CBS is specifically visual hallucinations linked to vision loss. And the key thing, usually, is that the person knows they're hallucinating.
Because it's incongruous, like Lullen's visitors.
Exactly. Lullen and Rosalie are classic examples. The hallucinations can be incredibly vivid, detailed, and sometimes triggered by stress or fatigue, like with Rosalie.
But Sachs emphasizes they aren't usually scary.
Generally not. Some people, like David Stewart, found them friendly. Lullen actually seemed to find them quite amusing, like his brain was putting on a show for him.
That's a much better way to experience it.
Definitely. Adair's journal gives this incredibly rich, almost poetic description, a sea of clouds turning into a field with birds in shoes, then medieval people. Then opening her eyes to stabs of sapphire and a legless vaquero on a steer, it really captures the vividness and, frankly, the strangeness.
And some people see these huge scenes, like armies marching.
Mr. Abel, yeah. Even though he was blind, he saw thousands of people in columns, horseback riders stretching for half a mile, all contained within what he called the organ of mental vision. Maybe a tiny spot in his mind.
It's incredible. The brain just fills the void.
It seems to actively construct its own reality when the usual input is gone or disrupted. The brain seems to need a coherent visual world, even if it has to make it up.
Okay, so what happens when hallucinations mix with cognitive problems?
Yeah.
Like dementia.
Sachs shares some really poignant stories there. Marlon's experience is interesting. He loved the radio, right?
Yeah, and he'd see people listening with him.
Right. His room would feel full of people listening along, mouths moving to the songs. It seemed to give him a kind of hallucinatory comfort.
Like company, even if it wasn't real. But his insight fluctuated.
It did, especially later in the day, that sundowning phenomenon. During the day, he might know they weren't real, but at night.
The intruders felt very real.
Very real. Criminal-like figures, smoking, one with a knife. Even though daytime Marlin knew they were like ghosts, nighttime Marlin was terrified.
That's tough. And Janet B. with
Oh,
the
God.
audiobook listeners.
Yeah, she initially knew the people she saw listening weren't real, but as her dementia progressed, she lost that insight. She became convinced they were there, even got angry when her daughter disagreed.
It shows how crucial our thinking abilities are for reality testing.
Absolutely. That ability to distinguish internal from external reality can really erode.
Okay, let's switch gears. Sensory deprivation. Those experiments sound intense.
They were pretty groundbreaking back in the 50s at McGill, putting people in environments with minimal sensory input, quiet, dark, sometimes floating.
What happened? Did they just go crazy?
Not exactly. First, they'd often sleep, then get restless, craving any stimulation. Their minds became very active fantasies, mental games, and then, often, the visual hallucinations started.
In a sequence.
Often, yeah. Starting simple changes in the visual field, then dots, lines, maybe geometric wallpaper patterns.
Then figures, like those little yellow men.
Uh-huh. And eventually, more complex scenes like that procession of squirrels with sacks. It was quite a progression.
Were they like flat cartoons?
Not always. For some, they became vividly three-dimensional, moving, rotating. Interestingly, people were often startled initially, but then found them amusing or interesting, if sometimes annoying. They didn't seem to mean anything, just felt external.
And they'd disappear if people did complex mental tasks.
Often, yes, but not with simpler things like talking or moving. Later studies, like Bexton's, found similar patterns, simple shapes evolving into figures, faces, landscapes. Again, often described as amusing and just appearing randomly.
Some people even saw their own movements leaving trails, or saw the picture while pouring.
Yeah, those sensorimotor linked hallucinations are fascinating.
So what's the brain explanation for this? Why does cutting off senses cause seeing things?
The thinking, supported by research like Baroud-Giardi's, is that the visual cortex becomes hyper-excitable when it doesn't get its usual input. Like turning up the gain on an amplifier with no signal, you get noise.
And the fMRI study on the blindfolded artist.
That was key. It showed significant activity in her visual system during hallucinations. But crucially, when she tried to just imagine the same thing...
The front part of her brain got involved. The
No.
executive control part.
Exactly, the prefrontal cortex. And that area wasn't as active during the actual spontaneous hallucinations.
So hallucination here is more bottom-up, just the visual system firing off.
It seems so. A direct activation of those now hyperactive pathways, rather than the top-down control of voluntary imagination.
And presumably this could happen with other senses too. Hearing, touch.
Absolutely. Deprive any sense, and the corresponding brain area might become overactive. Sachs mentions people immobilized in iron lungs, for instance.
Dead body hallucinations. Distorted limbs.
Yes, often corporeal ones, but also visual and auditory. He saw similar things in post-encephalitic patients whose movement was severely limited.
Okay, what about just extreme physical stress, like exhaustion and lack of sleep?
That's another major trigger. Not enough sleep, especially REM sleep, combined with sheer physical exhaustion. It's a potent mix for hallucinations.
Like Ray P. during the Iron Man, seeing his wife and mother.
Yeah, vividly seeing them on the roadside only to realize they were strangers. Overheated, dehydrated, his brain was clearly playing tricks.
And seeing Madame Pele, the volcano goddess.
Right! It shows how extreme states can tap into these powerful, maybe culturally ingrained images. Michael Shermer also wrote about marathon runners and Iditarod mushers having similar experiences.
Okay, let's talk smells. Olfactory hallucinations, or phantasmia. Mrs. B's weird tastes were a lead-in.
Yeah, sometimes taste distortions, dysgeusia can go along with or precede phantom smells. What's really odd is that sometimes completely losing your sense of smell, anosmia, can trigger smell hallucinations.
That seems backward.
It does. Heather A's descriptions show how varied these can be: metallic deodorant, acrid cake, melted plastic. Sometimes strong, sometimes subtle.
And the woman smelling strong smoke.
Yeah.
That must have been alarming.
Terribly. It shows how intense and convincing these phantom smells can feel, and Bonnie Blodgett's cacosmia, that persistent, vile smell like shit, puke, burning flesh after a sinus infection, sounds absolutely awful.
Really highlights how distressing they can be. What about hearing things? Auditory hallucinations. Sachs heard his name called.
He did when living alone. It shows how common these simpler ones can be. But we need to distinguish these from, say, the often negative voices in schizophrenia.
Right. Daniel Smith's book talked about normal voices being unremarkable, like simple commands.
Exactly. His father heard commands. His grandfather tried to use playful voices for betting tips, much different from the typical clinical picture.
Freud heard words shouted in dangerous situations.
Yes, intense stress seems capable of triggering these language-based, auditory, sometimes even visual phenomena.
And the brain basis, maybe the auditory cortex.
That's the likely area, though more research is needed, especially in the general population. Theories involve maybe misinterpreting inner speech or paying too much attention to subvocal thoughts. Hearing voices is a very broad term.
Like tinnitus, that ringing or hissing is a hallucination.
Technically, yes, a very common one, often linked to hearing loss.
And then there's musical hallucinations. Not voices, just music.
Yes, many people only hear music. It can be caused by stroke, tumors, neurodegeneration, toxins. But most commonly, it's linked to hearing loss in older adults.
People must be scared to mention it, worrying they're going crazy.
Absolutely, it's underreported. And these musical hallucinations can be incredibly intrusive, loud, even overwhelming real sounds.
What triggers them?
Various things, tinnitus itself, external noises, real music, even just associations, like the patient triggered by a bakery sign that reminded her of the song Alouette.
And the music is usually familiar.
Often from their earlier life, yeah. Sometimes stuff they don't even like, or just repetitive patterns. But the detail can be amazing, hearing every instrument perfectly, even if they aren't musical.
Like looping, the O Come All Ye Faithful example.
Exactly, stuck on repeat. And they just keep going, regardless of attention or other sounds. Gordon B., the violinist, hallucinated one piece while performing another.
Wow. And Sachs himself had them. During swimming.
Yeah, slow, languid music during races. And then the meds he took for that gave him visual hallucinations. Shows the complex interaction.
Like the brain's internal radio gets stuck on a weird station. Okay, drugs, the shortcut to altered states.
Right. Psychoactive substances have this long history, often used ritually. They directly tweak brain functions, chemically altering consciousness.
Breslau's hashish trip sounds eventful. Rooms changing size, morphing faces.
Yeah, and he found it humorous, which highlights how varied the experience can be. Sachs's own stories are fascinating too. Nothing from LSD initially than that huge cosmic and experience with cannabis.
Which he saw as both neurological and profound.
Right. And then trying Artane, the Parkinson's drug.
Seeing true indigo. And the Battle of Agincourt on his dressing gown.
Triggered by morphine and blending with his reading, he felt he was there. It shows how immersive these drug-induced worlds can be.
But then the flip side, the delirium tremens from chloral hydrate withdrawal.
Terrifying. That feeling of going mad, the swarms of small animals, a stark reminder of the dangers, especially withdrawal.
Definitely. Okay, shifting again. Migraines. Those auras sound less scary, more informative.
In a way, yes. They're usually benign, short-lived perceptual glitches that give us a window into brain function. The classic one is the scintillating scotoma.
The zigzag, shimmering shape with a blind spot.
That's it. And it's crucial to realize that pattern is a hallucination. Nothing like it exists externally. The brain is generating it.
And other visual weirdness can happen too. Color changes, depth issues, jerky movement.
Size and shape distortions, yeah. Jesse R. talked about his mind giving life to inanimate objects. Tony P. saw zigzags and a curtain blowing in the wind, and that weird blank spot, the scotoma itself.
Smells, too. Sometimes pleasant ones linked to memories.
Olfactory hallucinations can happen, often unpleasant, but sometimes nice, like buttered toast, often tied to these fleeting pseudo-memories. Taste hallucinations, too.
Where did the zigzags come from, neurologically?
Likely the primary visual cortex, V1, at the back of the brain. The way these geometric forms shift and change suggests this dynamic self-organization of neural activity.
Like patterns in nature.
Sachs makes that connection. Snowflakes, water turbulence, maybe reflecting universal principles of how neural networks and nature itself organize. It's like seeing the brain's raw activity.
Wow. Okay, epilepsy. Another source of hallucinations that has such a loaded history.
It does. Once seen as sacred, later heavily stigmatized. And seizures vary hugely, from grand mal to subtle auras, those warning signs.
Jen's story was intense. Migraines turning into seizures, light sensitivity.
Yeah, evolving into complex, partial, and then grand mal seizures, finally diagnosed with a focus in her left occipital lobe. Surgery helped, but it's an ongoing thing for her.
And Aura M's deja vu and dream flashbacks.
Triggered by tiredness or marijuana, stereotypic episodes managed without meds in her case, shows the range of subjective experiences.
Laura found them scary, but also kind of intriguing. A portal.
Right, that mix of apprehension and curiosity. Gowers noted auditory warnings early on. Thelma B's olfactory seizures and doubled consciousness, feeling detached while acting automatically, are also striking.
And Stephen's long history after a car accident shows how persistent it can be.
Definitely. Managing epilepsy can be a lifelong challenge for some.
Now, ecstatic seizures, that sounds paradoxical.
It does. Pinfield, the famous neurosurgeon, didn't really report them, but Dostoevsky vividly described ecstatic auras before his grand mal seizures.
The God exists moment.
That one. His novels also describe similar states, forced thinking, dreamy feelings, remarkably like temporal lobe phenomena.
Did epilepsy change him?
Alajoine, a neurologist, thought so, suggested it created a double man, increasingly mystical over time. Orrin Devinsky's work links these experiences, autoscopy, déjà vu, ecstasy, to temporal lobe epilepsy, often right-sided for theophanies or divine revelations.
Like the woman commanded to run for Congress.
A striking example. Though command hallucinations can rarely be dangerous, as in that tragic murder-suicide case driven by a perceived divine voice.
And Joan of Arc. Still debated.
Still debated whether temporal lobe epilepsy played a role in her visions. It raises the question, do ecstatic seizures tap into existing belief? Or does the seizure create the feeling by stimulating specific brain areas? Probably a bit of both.
Okay, release hallucinations. What's being released?
The idea, drawing from Hewlings-Jackson and others, is that damage to higher brain areas that normally exert control can release lower-level areas from inhibition.
So the lower areas become overactive.
Yeah.
Like in CBS.
Exactly. Damage anywhere along the visual pathway, eyes, nerves, occipital temporal lobes, thalamus, midbrain, can disrupt control and lead to these, often complex, visual hallucinations.
Like Ellen after surgery, or Marlene H. after her hemorrhage, seeing caterpillars and ants.
Right, or Aunt Dot's transient kaleidoscopes after a small stroke. Cole saw people and animals in his blind field after surgery, but importantly, he knew they weren't real.
Lance's patients, too. They recognize the absurdity.
Often, yes, which contrasts sharply with someone like Gordon H.
The man with the stroke who didn't realize he was blind on one side.
And his brain just filled in the gaps with context-fitting hallucinations, so seamless he didn't notice the deficit.
Almost like hallucinating reality itself in the blind spot.
Possibly a form of Anton syndrome, but maybe just in half the visual field. It shows the brain's intense drive for a complete picture, even an invented one.
Okay, body chemistry. Metabolic and toxic stuff. Michael F. getting stoned on protein.
Yeah, liver disease plus too much protein caused delirium, slowed brain waves, liver waves. He was even aware of the cause. Shows how internal imbalances hit the brain.
Fevers, too, especially in kids.
Can definitely trigger delirium and hallucinations. Erica S.'s Alice in Wonderland syndrome, feeling her body size change during chickenpox.
Jose B. too, size distortions and seeing cowboys.
Proprioceptive illusions as well. Even Piranesi's amazing architectural visions might have been fueled by malarial delirium.
Music hallucinations from fever. Angels singing.
Kate E. heard a choir. Christy C. saw musical notation. Fever can really scramble sensory processing.
And Richard's hospital delirium, that pageant of literature.
Likely drug-induced, elaborate narrative. Henry James also had terminal delirium and toxic psychoses, like in Waugh's novel, From Alcohol and Chlorohydrate.
Blurring reality completely.
And Seymour L's L-Dopa induced auditory hallucinations, threatening voices he could not be convinced weren't real. Shows how drugs can impact insight.
Okay, the edges of sleep. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic. Falling asleep and waking up.
Hypnagogic happens as you drift off, super common, usually totally normal. Galton noted them early on. McKellar found both visual and auditory stuff, voices, bells, animals.
Like Edmund Wilson hearing a phantom phone ring.
A great example. Nabokov described one-sided conversations and roguish profiles. Fleeting, often nonsensical.
Perseverative one, too. Seeing stuff from your day.
Yeah, like seeing Tetris blocks after playing for hours. What's amazing is the potential quality, brilliant colors, luminosity, detail that seems impossible.
Like the inner eye gets hyper-focused for a moment.
Something like that. Hypnopompic, on waking, is less common, but Spinoza's vivid image of a black Brazilian shows they can be intense.
So it's like the brain is briefly in this weird transitional state.
Seems likely. Winding down or starting up, and stray signals become perceptions, which connects directly to narcolepsy.
Right, because those hallucinations, plus sleep paralysis, are core symptoms.
Exactly. Narcolepsy involves problems regulating sleep-wake cycles linked to brain chemicals called orexins. Full narcolepsy is rare, but milder forms might be missed.
Jeanette B. thought she had schizophrenia, until she found a support group.
Yeah, the relief of finding others with the same scary experiences was huge. Shows the importance of correct diagnosis.
Sharon S.'s sleep paralysis hallucinations sound terrifying. Mattress, breathing like an elephant. Floating.
Classic, vivid tactile and visual stuff, often linked to cataplexy, that sudden muscle weakness. Stephanie W.'s daytime hallucinations, angels, ants, seeing people as dead likely happened during microsleeps.
Medication really helped them.
Can be life-changing. And Leno initially thought her experiences were paranormal before getting the narcolepsy diagnosis.
We heard from listeners too. The tall, pale man shouting numbers during paralysis, floating through floors.
Really frightening accounts. It's thought to be REM sleep dreaming, paralysis intruding into wakefulness. The boundaries just break down.
Okay, let's talk about emotions and trauma. Hallucinations linked to really significant events.
Yeah, distinct from those brief epileptic flashbacks, these are charged with meaning, haunting the mind. Bereavement hallucinations are a prime example.
Marion C. seeing and hearing her dead husband. Silas Weir Mitchell seeing his dead friend's face.
Powerful examples. Eleanor S. seeing her grandfather, Elizabeth J.'s son seeing his father running, our listener seeing their father. Grief is a powerful trigger.
Can they be comforting or more disturbing?
Both. Sometimes comforting, sometimes more complex, multisensory, leading to delusional beliefs about contact from beyond. Even milder trauma, like sax fall, could trigger vivid re-experiencing. And PTSD involves intense sensory flashbacks.
And in certain environments, shared emotion and belief can lead to group hallucinations, like witch trials.
Yes, extreme emotion, superstition, suggestion. They can foster community-wide experiences, like the demoniacal possession cases. Fear is contagious.
Fascinating. What about spiritually oriented ones? Not necessarily illness, but maybe sought after.
Right, sometimes seen as a normal, exceptional state.
Ah,
T.M. Lumen's work on evangelicals is interesting how God becomes real through practices engaging imagination and senses.
like training the mind to perceive.
Somewhat. Her earlier work on magic practitioners also showed focused imagination leading to clearer mental imagery. Evangelical prayer often emphasizes sensory detail to feel God's presence.
Sachs had a tactile one, possibly linked to prayer.
He mentions it. And children's imaginary companions can sometimes seem almost hallucinatory in their realness, like Haley W.'s detailed twin friends.
And Tom W. trying to have hypnagogic ones for fun.
Shows a conscious engagement with these states.
Okay, out-of-body experiences, OBEs.
Yeah.
We heard from a listener about rising up during sleep paralysis, feeling bliss.
A classic description. Peter S. felt freedom but also terror. Triggers are varied seizures, migraines, drugs, trances, lack of blood flow.
Like Sarah B. in the delivery room after blood loss, seeing herself from above.
A very compelling account of that detached perspective and eventual return to the body. Olaf Blank's research stimulating the right angular gyrus in epilepsy patients.
Induced OBEs, by messing with the brain's body map.
Exactly. That area seems crucial for integrating bodily and balance information, creating our sense of being located in our body.
So messing with it can make you feel like you're floating outside. Wow. What about seeing your double, autoscopy?
That sounds deeply unsettling. The patient seeing a silent, sad double mirroring him, aware it was a hallucination but still interacting with it.
Like in literature, Maupassant's Le Horla.
Right. And Maupassant reportedly had these experiences himself, eventually not recognizing his own reflection. It's a profound disruption of self-perception.
Another patient saw a transparent double doing things he felt guilty about not doing.
Like a projected conscience. These experiences really probe our sense of self and embodiment.
Okay, final area. Phantom limbs and body image. Those sensory ghosts are common, right?
Very common after amputation. William James found they often shrink or fade, except hands, maybe due to their large brain representation. Sometimes the arm part disappears, leaving a floating hand.
Jeanette W., the quadriplegic, needed visual sips from mirrors.
To maintain her sense of a normal phantom body, Nelson felt his phantom hand clenching tightly, linked to feelings in his actual arm stump.
Ramachandran's mirror box therapy. To unlearn paralysis.
Based on the idea of learned paralysis from lack of feedback shows the brain's plasticity. The opposite is reflex paralysis. An intact limb feels alien and won't move.
And body integrity identity disorder, wanting a healthy limb removed.
A rare but profound mismatch between physical body and brain's body map. Brain imaging now helps us understand the neural basis of these disturbances, like the patient with a parietal tumor who disowned his own leg.
It's amazing how tied our sense of self is to these brain maps, even Jeans' non-theistic mystical experience.
Feeling a mighty person nearby shows these profound experiences aren't always interpreted religiously.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive into Sachs's work just shows an incredible spectrum, doesn't it?
Absolutely. From benign to terrifying, triggered by so many different things, sensory changes, illness, brain events, intense emotions. It's definitely not just about mental illness.
Makes you think. So after hearing all this, maybe consider those moments when your own internal world feels incredibly vivid. Where do we draw that line between perception, imagination, and these really powerful inner experiences?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question about our own subjective reality and the brain's incredible, sometimes strange ways of constructing it. If this sparked your interest, definitely check out more of Sachs' work or related neuroscience. Reflect on your own experiences too, you might find surprising connections.